You know that feeling, that sinking in your stomach after you did something you knew you shouldn't have done. That quiet shame, the kind no one sees but you carry everywhere. That's where this begins, the pain of regret. There are moments in your life that didn't break you physically, but they cracked something inside. Moments where you acted out of impulse, said something you didn't mean, followed a desire you should have resisted, or betrayed your own standards just to feel accepted for one fragile moment. And afterwards, the regret hit you like a weight. You told yourself, "Why did I do that? How do I stop doing this again?" This video is your map out of that cycle. Today, you're going to learn 7 things you must never do if you want self-respect, control, and composure, the essentials of modern Stoic mastery. These aren't rules to limit you. These are the 7 chains that, once broken, give you back your peace. And each one comes with a Stoic secret, a mental weapon, to ensure you never fall into the same trap again.
1. Don't react on impulse. You've felt this one more times than you want to admit. A text that provokes you, a comment online that hits a nerve, a tone of voice that makes you feel small. Your instinct is to hit back, to reply instantly, to defend yourself. But every time you react without thinking, you hand your power away. Marcus Aurelius taught, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The modern translation, if you react instantly, you're not in control. Your impulses are. The Stoic secret here is simple. Pause before you respond. Not for 10 minutes, not for an hour, just 2 seconds. 2 seconds is enough for your prefrontal cortex, the rational mind, to override the emotional storm. Someone says something disrespectful. Instead of snapping back, you take a breath and say calmly, "Noted," then walk away. You don't fight for the last word, you become the last word. But if I don't react, won't people walk all over me?
No. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy. The one who controls himself controls the room. 2. Don't over-explain yourself. One of the fastest ways to lose respect is to constantly justify your decisions. You've seen it. People who talk too fast, explain too much, try too hard to be understood. They drown their own authority under a flood of unnecessary words. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." In modern life, stop proving. Start showing. When you say less, your words carry more weight. When you defend yourself less, your decisions look stronger. When you stop explaining, people start observing. Someone questions your plan. Instead of arguing for 5 minutes, you simply say, "I've considered the options. This is the direction I'm taking." Then move forward. You speak like someone who respects their own mind. But won't I seem arrogant? Only if your silence hides insecurity. If your silence comes from clarity, people feel it. Silence is the language of those who are sure of themselves. Number 3, don't seek approval. You know that temptation. You post something online and check it 20 times. You tell a joke and scan faces for validation. You make a decision and hope everyone agrees. But every moment you look outward for permission to be yourself, you weaken the foundation of who you are. Seneca wrote,
If you live according to others' opinions, you will never be free. Modern translation: approval seeking is mental slavery because you're outsourcing your identity. The Stoic secret here is powerful. Ask yourself, if no one saw this, would I still choose it? If the answer is yes, you're aligned with your nature. If the answer is no, you're living for applause. You say yes to a plan you don't want to be part of, just so people won't think you're rude. But later, you resent it. Not because of them, but because you betrayed yourself. The cure isn't being rude, it's being honest. Respect that is built on dishonesty is not respect, it's dependency. 4. Don't argue for ego. You've been in that trap before, locked in a pointless argument because you couldn't stand being wrong, or because the other person made you feel small. But listen carefully. Arguing to feed your ego is the fastest way to lose dignity. Epictetus taught, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit. People don't respect the loudest in the room. They respect the one who doesn't need validation to know he's right. Surprising truth? You win more arguments by ending them than by beating them. Someone challenges your point. Rather than debating endlessly, you simply say, "You may be right," and you'll walk away. You didn't surrender, you transcended. But I need to stand up for myself. Standing up for yourself doesn't always mean arguing. It often means not letting your ego drag you into war. Self-control is the highest form of defense. 5. Don't hold on to anger. Anger feels powerful in the moment, like a weapon you grip to feel less vulnerable. But anger doesn't burn your enemies, it burns you. Marcus Aurelius warned, the best revenge is to be unlike your enemy. If someone hurts you and you become bitter because of it, you lose twice. The Stoic solution isn't suppression, it's transmutation. Instead of asking, why did they do this to me? Ask, what can I learn about myself? Every trigger reveals a wound. Every wound reveals a lesson. Someone betrays you. Instead of clinging to anger, you cut them off cleanly without hatred. You protect your peace without poisoning your mind. Forgiveness means they got away with it. No. Forgiveness means you broke the chain tying you to them. You rise not by revenge, but by release. 6. Don't waste time on random pleasure. Modern life is a casino designed to distract you. TikTok, drama, porn, sugar, impulse spending, emotional chasing. Every pleasure is a hook, and every hook pulls you away from who you could become. Stoics understood this deeply. Chrysippus wrote that uncontrolled desire is the root of suffering. Modern version: not everything that feels good is good for you. Pleasure is not evil. Pleasure is expensive because you pay for it with time, attention, and self-control. You scroll for 20 minutes after saying, just one video. You feel empty after, not because the content was bad, but because you lost a battle to your own mind. Discipline gives a deeper pleasure than indulgence ever could. You gain a quiet pride that lasts longer than any dopamine hit. 7. Don't betray your own standards. This is the one that cuts the deepest. The thing you must never do, because nothing hurts more than breaking a promise you made to yourself. When you tell yourself, I'll wake up early, and you don't, you lose respect for yourself.
When you say, "I won't go back to that person," and you do, your mind stops trusting your word. When you declare, "This time I'll change," but your actions stay the same, your soul feels it. You can lie to the world. You can lie to your friends, but you can't lie to the mirror. Integrity is not morality. Integrity is alignment. What you know, what you say, what you do, all moving in one direction. You say you value health, but you ignore it. You say you value growth, but you procrastinate. You say you want respect, but you tolerate disrespect from yourself. The biggest betrayal is self-betrayal. But here's the hopeful truth. Integrity can be rebuilt, one promise at a time, even tiny ones. That's the path forward. The transformation, your new identity. If you stop doing these 7 things, reacting, explaining, seeking, arguing, holding anger, wasting yourself, and breaking your own word, something begins to change inside you. You feel lighter, stronger, calmer, and slowly, you become someone who doesn't need to talk about strength because you emanate it. You don't need to prove value because you embody it. You don't need to chase respect because others give it freely. You become aligned. And alignment is magnetic. People feel it. They adjust to you. They respect you because they can sense you respect yourself. This is the modern Stoic path. Quiet power, silent mastery, inner freedom. And every day you choose this path, you break another chain the world tried to put on you. Maybe you've done every wrong thing on this list. Maybe you've broken your own word many times. Maybe you're afraid you've already damaged yourself too much. But you haven't, because the moment you become aware is the moment you can begin again. And the mind that can begin again can become unstoppable. You are not defined by what you used to do. You are defined by what you choose to stop doing starting today. If this message helped you see yourself more clearly, then you belong with us, the ones rebuilding themselves from the inside out. Like this video if you're done with the behaviors that hold you back. Comment, "I choose strength," so others know you walk this path too. And subscribe to Psyche Machina, not for more content, but to join a community where modern minds learn ancient power and rise above the noise together. You're not alone. You're becoming someone new. Welcome to the circle.